Hello everyone, I hope they're doing very well. I am very excited to share these two gouache paintings with you today because I think they're two of my best paintings to date. But before we get to the actual process, I want to mention that I'm trying out some new paper with these pieces. The video is not sponsored, but Etchr Lab very kindly sent me one of their watercolor blocks, and I was very curious to try it out because I'd heard really good things about it from other artists that I follow. So I'm using a mix of Winsor & Newton and Royal Talens gouache on the Etchr Lab cold pressed watercolor paper. They also have a hot press version, which is smoother, but I prefer slightly more textured paper, so they sent me the cold press one. I think especially if you do more illustration type work, maybe the hot press would work really well for you because it allows you to get cleaner lines. But as I said, I like more texture in my pieces because I just think it makes everything a bit more interesting, especially when it comes to gouache, since it doesn't have that kind of texture of the thick paint that I'm used to with oils. I like to have a bit more of a textured paper. Obviously there's a limit to that because at a certain point it starts inhibiting you from applying the paint properly, but I found that this paper had a really good balance to the point where it still made the painting interesting how I like it, but it wasn't so rough like other papers that I've used in the past that I found it really hard to paint on. So would definitely recommend that. But my goal for this painting session was just to practice using gouache as an opaque medium a bit more and really try to get more saturated colors with it. I did a couple gouache paintings while I was on holiday which turned out really dull and they didn't have a lot of character, a lot of contrast, and I was specifically trying to practice that in these pieces, see if I could understand what went wrong those two other times. So for the first painting, I really wanted to paint a fruit market scene. I had this in my mind for a couple of weeks before I did this painting, and I found this amazing photograph on Pexels, which is a copyright-free image website that I like to use for painting references sometimes. I generally try to take my own whenever I can, but that's not always the case, and so copyright-free image websites are really useful for that, I found. And for both paintings in this video, I'm using photographs from a Japanese photographer that I found on there, whose name I'll have on screen because I cannot pronounce it, but I think his photos are absolutely amazing and I highly recommend you check out his work. So I'm doing a fruit market painting first, and then I'm going to be doing a close-up painting of a bowl of ramen. I love the colors in both of these. They're quite different, but I think they both look really lovely. The first one is more saturated, it's more colorful, there's like just a wider range of colors, while the second one is a bit more muted, and I think the interest in the second one really comes in with trying to bring colors into the white, but I'll explain more about that later. This painting, I have to say, really went through a very long, ugly stage. I feel like lately I haven't had that happen with my paintings a lot, especially working with oil. But I'm just saying wait for it because it does turn out well in the end. But I think I tried approaching it a bit differently and kind of using thick paint straight from the beginning, which I think worked really well. But it also meant that the painting took a lot longer to look somewhat finished and the page took longer to be fully covered in paint. If we kind of exclude the orange underpainting, I just kind of did that to help establishing values more correctly. But in terms of the actual colors that are meant to be in the piece, they took a lot longer to be placed in the right spots because I was really just trying to do the whole piece in one layer instead of with my usual layered approach, if it makes any sense. So there's a long while in which the piece just looks really weird and kind of patchy because it's literally just spots of paint on the page. But I promise it does come together at the end, and I'm actually really proud of both of these pieces. And this one, I'm really proud of myself for using colors this way because I have my own color palette that I rely on very heavily, and I was very interested in trying to use more saturated colors and more saturated greens and things like that, and I'm very happy I did because I honestly really like the end result. I don't think I used a lot of blue still, which is very typical of my paintings. I don't use a lot of blues unless it's to tone down other colors, or I like to introduce blues in my whites to make the white more interesting, and I'll talk more about that with the second painting because I think I did that a lot in there. But I'm overall just really happy with this, even though looking back at the process, it's definitely very different than my usual painting processes. Getting onto the second painting, I want to mention, because I forgot earlier, the block I'm using is glued at the edges, and I have to say it's glued quite strongly, so I think if you wanted to use this for ink or like layered watercolor pieces with a lot of water, I think it would hold up really well. I personally knew that I wasn't going to use a lot of water in this, and so I just took the single sheets and taped them to my table. The tape I'm using has like less like glue strength than washi tape. Honestly, I just use it to get the white border, but even then the paper didn't really buckle. I used more water for the second underpainting, like the one that I did for this painting, and it was starting to wave a little bit as it was wet, but then it dried flat, so I had no issues with it. It can be really annoying if your paper starts warping, especially if you keep adding water on top of it, because it starts pooling and it drying weird, but I had none of those issues with this, so just wanted to mention that. But getting onto this painting, I was really drawn to it because of the colors. I think they really fit my own color palette very well, and I just knew I was going to have a lot of fun painting this. But also it's a very detailed piece, and I've tried painting some more detailed food pieces in the past, and I've always really struggled with them. So I was also interested to see how that would go. And I tried to approach this with as blocky of an approach as I could, and then slowly start to introduce details a little bit at a time, because it's not my standard piece where only a certain area of the painting gets a lot of detail. There's kind of detail throughout that I wanted to add. But I'm very happy with the way that I went about this, and something that I was mentioning before, there's a lot of white in this piece, or at least there's a lot of light areas, and I wanted to make sure that even though there were a lot of light areas, I could still make the piece dynamic, and the way that I do that is by introducing color into these light areas. So I'm not just using straight white, but I'm tinting this white with a little bit of yellow, a little bit of blue, a little bit of green, a little bit of something to make these white areas more dynamic. And even then, I'm not just painting that as a solid block of color. I'm placing these different white tints next to each other. So I think you can see that really well in kind of the back of the bowl, but also on the egg whites. The egg whites are kind of a mix of a very neutral white, but there's also a very warm yellowy white, there's also a very cool blue white, there's also a bit of green in there. And same goes for the back of the bowl. There's a lot of different grays. There's some kind of reddish, even pinkish tinted grays next to some yellow grays and some really cool grays. And I think that really helps make a simple block of color more interesting, and this is something that I really like to do with white. You can also do it with darker colors, but I find doing that with black areas can be a lot harder, especially because I find the fact that gouache doesn't dry the same color that it looks like when it's wet, I find that so confusing still. And I find that even more confusing when I'm working with darker colors rather than lighter colors. I've kind of started to understand how to work with lighter colors, but I feel like I don't use black as much. And it's just something that I'm gonna have to keep practicing and keep getting used to. But overall, so happy with both of these pieces. I think the second process went a little bit more smoothly than the first one. The painting kind of came together a bit quicker, I think. But overall, I love the result of both of these ones. I'm really happy with these, and I hope you like them as well. And I'm going to see you very soon with a new video. But for now, I'm going to wish you a lovely week. I hope you enjoy watching this painting process, and yeah, see you soon. Bye.